Welcome everybody. We're gonna do a little Card Knock Life plays deck tech today. I did a primer on this green white company deck that I'm super excited about. Like I said, I stumbled across this list. Munin 40 placed in the Modern Challenge with this. I'm not exactly how the Modern Challenge is broken down, but did well enough to get posted on the Wizards website based on a 6-1 finish. So 6-1 is pretty good. This list is like about 95% of what Munin was playing. I made some changes myself. Notably, in the main deck, the String Wildwood is my change. I'll explain a little bit of how the deck works. I'll go over my changes to the sideboard and what I think of those. But generally, how I think that this deck works in comparison to like the more like junk versions of this deck based around this Vizier combo. We've heard a lot about this. People have some major opinions on this Vizier combo. Many people don't believe in it. Others are calling for its ban. So we've got some very varied opinions on it. Obviously, when it works really well. Consistently, turn 3 is like a pretty consistent combo turn, and you can reliably go off with 3 Viziers and 4 Devoted Druids in your deck. Find a Duskwatch Recruiter, one of your 2 Duskwatch Recruiters off the back of a Collected Company or a Court of Calling, or you just might have a Walking Ballista in your hand. But this deck has other ways to draw cards to find those combo pieces in like Tireless Trackers and things like that. And so there's just a lot of value as kind of the plan B. So one of the things I talked about in my primer was that I was really excited about this being kind of like a mid-rangey sort of value deck as an alternative to just all in on the combo. So what I wasn't super excited about in the junk versions was the junk version of the deck plays black for Viscera Seer in the main deck, and basically really that's the only black card that it runs in the main deck. And it needs a Viscera Seer so it can combo with Kitchen Finks, Viscera Seer, and Vizier of Remedies as one of the other combos that it can run. Obviously that's infinite life there because you can sacrifice the Kitchen Finks infinite times and gain 2 life each time you do it. And Scry as well. Now that was the old combo in the old Abzan Company decks. Typically you would Scry a Murderous Redcap to the top, and then the next turn you could do the same kind of combo with the Murderous Redcap doing infinite damage. That would be a little funky with this deck because typically these ones don't play the Murderous Redcap. Instead you just have to kind of set up for maybe an infinite damage combo with Devoted Druid, infinite mana into Walking Ballista in that way. So it was always a little awkward to do that second combo. So instead, what I thought was this provides a totally different parameter to go on, whereas if your opponent interrupts your combo, your plan is just to attack. And the deck seems to do that pretty well. When you get into the mode where you've just got a bunch of Birds of Paradise on the table, it's really not the end of the world because you're running cards like Gavany Township in the deck. And Gavany Township is a really, really great card against control decks, which typically have a pretty good matchup against us. There's certain Jeskai control decks that can really tear us apart. And when we're sitting and looking at a bunch of Birds of Paradise and Noble Hierarchs, that's kind of a really bad situation for us in a lot of cases. But if you draw a Gavany Township, that can quickly turn that around because you don't need to cast anything and worry about it getting countered or not, because you can just activate a Gavany Township every turn and grow your team out of control. Usually you can win the game pretty consistently by just growing Birds of Paradise and attacking in that way, and then netting cards in your hand to eventually cast and overwhelm mana leaks and cryptic commands and things that your opponent would try to stop you with. On top of that, we've got room for some kind of sideboard cards that we can throw in here because we're not committed to a bunch of spots for this combo in the deck either. So we can run things like Spellskite in the main, which is one thing that I really love to have in here. And Spellskite with Collected Company, I just love the interaction between Court of Calling, not Collected Company, but both, I suppose. But to instant speed, pop out a Spellskite when your opponent's trying to point a bolt at your Devoted Druid and just redirect a Spellskite, just to blank that spell and have an insurance plan for your combo later on too. It feels really good. And then in general, Spellskite's just a really good trump card for a lot of things that your opponent can try to do to interact with your combo. To have that in the main deck, that seems great, and a lot of decks don't take advantage of that. So I think that more like having an insurance plan for the one combo that really does work well seems to pay off more than having a second combo, like if that combo doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? So that's not only the more fun way to play this deck, I think, but it's also the more like reliable way to play this deck. So the other things we get allowed to do, we have space to do, are we have Scavenging Ooze in the main deck, and I know some of the junk versions play Scavenging Ooze in the main deck. We have Scavenging Ooze in the main deck, which allows us to deal with some graveyard shenanigans. And Dredge is really a miserable matchup for everybody game one, because if you're not prepared for it, some decks really do like have good answers to Dredge game one. Like Scred, for example, runs like 4 main deck Relic Progenitus, which is super weird, but like it's just great against Dredge. But typically you just get run over by like prized amalgams if they dredge the right cards in their graveyard. Scavenging Ooze can take care of Dredge, and having just one in your deck in this kind of deck, you have a lot of ways to tutor up in like your Court of Callings and Collected Companies. So it's really like you're running like almost 9 copies of it, but more like 5 copies of it in 4 chords and 1 Scavenging Ooze. So that's pretty cool. Kasali Pride Mage also is a card that I almost always run in my main deck. I think he's just a really reliable beater. I really love having Kasali Pride Mage alongside Noble Hierarch and like a Birds of Paradise, because the Exalted is nothing to scoff at, especially when Birds of Paradise is a flying creature in a modern format that really doesn't have a lot of flying creatures. When you're dealing with Planeswalkers, if your opponent isn't on like some Lingering Souls plan, Birds of Paradise can get in there and you can attack those Planeswalkers pretty effectively. So it's something that's easily forgotten, but it's a good way to deal with problems like, Liliana of the Veil when they're destroying your creatures and you really have no way to really combat that. Another reason I wanted to throw in String Wildwood, kind of going back to the Flyers plan, is we really don't have a lot of Flyers that can get aggressive and can deal with like a bunch of Lingering Souls tokens. But I've been seeing a couple of these like Spirits decks online, and I've been seeing a lot of Spell Quellers lately. String Wildwood is a card that you can kind of like surprise your opponent with, and they often forget that you have it in play. They often forget that it has reach. So I don't want to play it assuming that my opponent's dumb and doesn't know what it does. But you do also have the option of Knight of the Reliquary, end of turn, put it into play, and then it untaps right away, and then you have this creature to attack with. Or you have you have a blocker eventually that can take care of flying creatures. You really don't have a lot that can do something with flying creatures aside from like exiling with Fiend Hunter. So it's just one more package option for the Knight of the Reliquary, but it's also it's a good blocker for Flyers. So again, with the kind of like value plan and toolboxy plan, that gives you just one more choice. And there really aren't a lot of comes into play tapped lands here, so it's not too hard to run that. I'm finding that this is really my first time giving Knight of the Reliquary the time of day in Modern. I never really tried him because I felt like I'd always invest in the creature and it would die right away. But I'm finding that it's not really the case in this sort of deck because it's like the top of my curve. And when I'm running things like Noble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise on 1, your opponent's kind of like trained to have this reaction of like Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt those creatures as soon as they see them. And so their removal is being spent on 1-drops and eventually like 2-drops like Spellist Guide or Pride Mage or Scooz or Duskwatch Recruiter or probably your combo pieces. So this guy's like usually home free by turn 3, and if left unchecked, Knight of the Reliquary quickly gets out of hand. It's just nuts like what that thing can do. So once this grows out of Lightning Bolt range, man, they're in trouble. They've got to path it. They really do. And when they path it, hopefully you've already found a Gavany Township at that point. So he's pretty crazy. I really, really like Knight of the Reliquary in this deck. Let's see. What else is there worth mentioning in the main deck? I mean, we know that the combo exists. I do not run Ronus. A lot of people mentioned after I wrote that primer up on the website that Ronus would be a good fit in here. Yeah, I would agree with that. I just don't like Ronus so much because of the fact that he's so path to exilable. Whereas Walking Ballista is a card that I can always rely on being around, I can have him in play. If he gets targeted with a path, I can remove all his counters and send him to the graveyard so I can get him back with an Eternal Witness later on. But Ronus can be dealt with. And also, there are times where Ronus just does nothing on the table. And it's infrequent, but it's possible. Whereas Walking Ballista is kind of like another piece of removal in this deck that really doesn't have much removal at all. And it really interacts super well with Gavany Township, which is pretty cool. This is like, if I'm willing to pay 4 mana to put a counter on this dude, I might as well pay 4 mana to put a counter on all my dudes. And then, start shooting at their creatures or their face. So, there you have it. That's our main deck. I'm going to pull open the sideboard and we can kind of take a look at that. Alright, so in our sideboard, we've got one Burnt and Forge Tender. I can't remember how much of this was originally in Munin's list. I don't think a lot of it was. I think a lot of this has changed. Kitchen Finks I think I took from his list, but Burnt and Forge Tender I think was my own inclusion. And this was kind of insurance on Anger of the Gods, which is really a card that will basically win your opponent the game if you don't have a bunch of Court of Callings and Collected Companies ready to rebuild. So Burnt and Forge Tender is great for that purpose. It's also a really easy card to Court of Calling into play because it costs just 1 mana, and so I like that for that purpose. Path to Exile, we obviously need some removal. When we're playing certain matchups like the mirror match, we need ways to deal with the opposing Devoted Druids and things like that. So we need Path. I originally had 4 and I cut down to 3 because there were very few matchups where I wanted all 4 of them. But the argument can be made that 4 are needed. Kataki is here for obvious reasons. One corner case interaction with Kataki that's kind of cool is Tireless Tracker, who I didn't really mention when we're talking about the main deck, but Tireless Tracker is a beast. We talked about that on the cast last week. Tireless Tracker nets you a ton of clues in this deck because, again, he's the top of our curve, and like I said, all the removals kind of burned on your 1 and 2 drops here. Tireless Tracker can give you 5 clues, say. Alright, you play a Kataki. Kataki says, artifacts have, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this artifact unless you pay 1. And I'm sorry, that's kind of off screen. Tireless Tracker says, whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. Now, you're not going to draw a card for investigating with the clue, but you are going to get a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker, so he is going to grow. So if at the beginning of your upkeep you choose not to pay the cost on each of those 5 clues, you are going to get yourself an 8/7 Tireless Tracker to attack, and for free. So, kind of a weird situation, kind of weird interaction. You may not want to do that because you may just want to generate all that card advantage in that case, but there might be a time where your opponent just is at 8 life and in top deck mode, and that might be enough to kill them, and you just want to do that. Alright, Selfless Spirit. Another insurance policy against control decks, which are pretty tough. When you're dealing with Supreme Verdict, you kind of have to have an answer to that sort of thing. Selfless Spirit is a great target for, again, Collected Company, Court of Calling. Flash him out, sacrifice him, and all of a sudden, when your opponent thought they were going to net some major advantage on the board, you lose 1 Court of Calling out of your hand, and you still are left with a bunch of creatures on the battlefield. Alright, Stony Silence. This is the one rare case where I don't put a creature in my sideboard. It's possible that maybe just another artifact hate creature would be better here, but Stony Silence is just so much of a beast against decks that run artifacts and need to activate artifact abilities that it's you just have to squeeze it in there. Now, it's hard because you get so much value out of these singleton creatures in the sideboard that it's 1 Stony Silence, the chance of drawing this 1 Stony Silence versus the ability to Chord or Collected Company out one of these creatures, it's got to really be worthwhile, and I think it really, really is with this Stony Silence. Especially knowing that in the matchups that you're going to want it, you're probably going to get, well, I take that back. You probably aren't going to want it with a bunch of clues, but you're probably going to want it in matchups where you're going to be, getting your value engines and really digging for it. Eidolon of Rhetoric, obviously there are matchups where this just straight up wins you the game. Primarily, Storm is one where I'd board it in. You could board it in matchups where you're facing Snapcaster Mage. You could board it in against burn is even a possibility. It's a good blocker for burn decks, and also it could slow those burn decks down and make it difficult for them to play some combat tricks with their Monastery Mentors. That would be kind of a weird case, but I think it's possible that wouldn't be the worst decision in the world. But there are plenty of other reasons. Eidolon Reditor is a great card. I've seen a lot of these decks using Aethersworn Canonist as well. I don't like Aethersworn Canonist as well. I think it's worth going up to 3 for Eidolon of Rhetoric just because it's a 1/4. It's much harder to kill. And Canonist... Canonist is difficult because there are advantages to it because you do have some artifacts. It's like, okay, you might have some like corner cases where it's like, yeah, kind of worthwhile, but the bigger advantage is that it only costs 2, so it's easier to find out of your deck. But like I said, the 3 mana for a 1/4 is much more worthwhile because versus Storm, they're going to need to pair 2 lightning bolts to kill it, and they can't, right? They can only cast 1 spell a turn, so they just cannot beat that thing down. Linvala, Keeper of Silence, just straight up shuts down opposing Connor's Company decks, among other things, any other activated creature ability decks. I mean, obviously that's what it does. There are a few that I would really want it against other than Connor's Company, but I'm sure that there are things that I'm just not thinking of right now. Reclamation Sage, pretty straightforward here, right? There are times where Kasali Pride Mage is great, but having to sacrifice the creature is just kind of like not the most appealing thing in the world. But most of the times we're bringing a Reclamation Sage, you want both, right? You want both. Voice Resurgence is debatably not necessary in the sideboard, but it's because control matchups are a little tough. This card is just a house against those decks. I mean, I think that it's worth like just going full on like value Creature Town against those guys, and yeah, I don't know, it's kind of an experiment for me. So this would be the first card to come out of the sideboard, but I do like it in here still because we are a little light on 2-drops in this deck aside from our combo pieces. And if I'm gonna ever board out the combo and I just want a creature, like even against Jund where I'm gonna have to sacrifice something to Liliana, I might want to sacrifice a Voice Resurgence, get a big ass token, and attack into that Liliana. Kitchen Finks, I've got 2 of those. They just happen to be 1 foil or 2 different sets. I guess that's why they're separated. Easy to explain that one. I mean, the interaction with Viscera Seer still gives him infinite recursions. There's no sacrifice engine that gives him infinite life, but it is just a major value engine and some life gain against decks where you're going to need that. Tech Edge, because I do have neither Reliquary Shenanigans going on in this deck, so I can search out my Tech Edge and deal with land problems in the opposing side of the table. And Phyrexian Revoker is a card that I wasn't sure about at first, but I've been more than happy with against Planeswalkers, against plenty of really awesome things, and particularly with the rise of Connor's Company in Modern, this card has done wonders for me. This and Linvala in my sideboard have really improved that matchup. So I'm bringing in like Phyrexian Revoker, Linvala, Path to Exile. I've got plenty of things that I want against that Connor's Company matchup. And I think this deck has a pretty good quote-unquote mirror match, quotation marks, because I wouldn't consider this a traditional Abzan Connor's Company deck. I mean, we're the green-white kind of value version. So quite a different game plan in that respect. So there you have it. If I can muster it this week, I'm going to get up a couple of games. I played quite a few leagues with this deck with varied results. I think I had a couple 4-1s, a 5-0, and then more recently it's been a little tougher. I think that this deck is a little bit more known. As it was a surprise to players, it was easier to kind of go and free roll some combo wins in early turns. But I think people are more aware of the Vizier of Remedies and Devoted Druid combo, and so it's been a little bit more tough going. But I would say that it is the real deal. I think all the naysayers out there will be silenced as this deck continues to solidify its place in Modern, because it's good. It's very good. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.